Hello. Good of all of you to join us. Welcome to Immersive Implication. I'm Jabari Weathers. I'm moderating this panel. You can find me online at Goblin Princet on Twitter. I'm a games writer and illustrator, and here are my wonderful co-panelists, who I would love to introduce yourselves before I get into what this panel's about.
You're gonna have to pick who goes first.
Oh, who shoots first? So starting with Janaea.
Sweet. Hello, my name is Jonea Kemper, and I am an academic and games designer who specializes in transformational role-playing and how we can use that to our best benefit.
Wonderful.
It's very succinct. I'm practicing.
Yeah, I love it.
That didn't help. Sorry.
Hey folks, I'm Whitney Strix Beltran. I don't even know how to describe myself anymore. I'm the project narrative director over at Hidden Path Entertainment, where we are currently making a AAA Dungeons and Dragons video game. I'm the co-designer of Wizard's Bride, also known for Hollow Vista, Beyond Blue, State of Decay 2, Raccoon Lagoon. I do a lot of games. I am in this industry because I like making people cry. That is why I exist. So I'm really jazzed about this panel and getting to talk about how interactive media can change our perspective about ourselves.
And April.
Hi, I'm April Walsh. My pronouns are she, her, and gay gem. I am Gay Spaceship Games. I make games like Thirsty Sword Lesbians and End of the Line that celebrate queer love and power. When I'm not designing games, I'm a civil liberties attorney, and that involves realizing agency and autonomy in real-world systems. And I'm really excited to talk about the ways that RPGs help us recognize our places in and out of those systems. And I'm also delighted to introduce Gremlin the cat, who's very happy to be here despite the space she's making.
What a cute cat. Thank you all so much. Wow, I need a second to just process how cute
Gremlin lives up to their name, that's for sure.
Yeah, she's a gremlin.
Wow. So, yeah, thank you all for joining me on this. Just to frame what immersive implication is, essentially, and this dovetails nicely with Whitney's impulse to make people cry in this medium. Immersive implication is a term that I've been kind of using and thinking about to refer to the moments in fiction and interactive media where the experience is kind of calling out the audience or the participants who are indulging in that space, or really calling them in. So any moment where a game, ideally in the course of this panel, or a story makes you fiercely aware of not only your agency, but also the consequence of your agency. And as you have to like kind of process that in the moment is kind of the soil of where this term came from in my mind. And to that end, I'd love to go into the questions that we have and just start talking about this. So the first that I have rattling around in my brain, April, I'd love for you to start out with this question, is interactive or not, what is a memorable instance of a piece of narrative media implicating you, and what did it lead you to reflect on?
I'm trans. In an RPG, you can play whatever gender you want. Boom, done. I did it. I was immersed. I reflected. And now I'm me, and that's awesome. But I also wanted to, in response to this question, talk about how people are like really good at immersing in stories. And that really varies depending on like what kind of player you have. And so like it's really neat to talk about tools for achieving or avoiding immersion, but also like if a game just gets out of your way, humans do that thing and it's really cool and neat. And as I was reflecting on what kinds of games had the greatest impact in this regard on me, they're games where the structure of the narrative that was created was what had that valence for me, as opposed to something that the mechanics made happen.
I see. Is there a particular anecdote that like exemplified this for you?
Sure. I mean, so one feature of LARP is that you can be running around a big space and very much getting into the like body and presence and relations of your character. And I remember when my adopted gargoyle daughter was in danger, I heard there was a demon going where I knew where she was. And so, ran over there and tanked some demon fire and had like a very, very tearful moment, like with daughter. And it sort of brought us into a deep emotional place that opened the landscape to talk about like everything that there was going on between us, in terms of her accepting that she was an adopted gargoyle but had human relatives. And that would be my anecdote, where it was the narrative that was part of the game design, because it was a LARP with a scenario that led to that. But then the mechanics of the LARP, where there are significant stakes, like actually bad consequences could have happened and so on, helped to heighten that. And that was the doorway into exploring everything else that was going on between our characters, and embodying those feelings that like, I don't have a daughter and she's never been attacked by demons. And that's a new way of like relating to another person that you get to embody that way.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So Whitney, how about you?
Yeah, just really quickly, please call me Strix. So when considering your term, Jabari, immersive implication, my own running definition of it, because I've just decided to run with it, is that like it shows you something about yourself that you maybe wouldn't like willingly embrace in the first place. Like it has to almost seduce you. And that's why I'm actually most interested in this term, is seduction. Because that's what I'm good at when I'm drawing people out in my games, but also because I find it really effective. And I'm going to steal your thunder a little bit and talk about Midsummer, but I promise I'll talk about other things too.
No, go for it.
So I loved Midsummer because, and this is not a universal experience, but I experienced the seduction of rooting for, the bad things that happen at the end in the way that the main character did. And the immersive implication for me was, before watching the movie, cults are stupid. People who join cults are stupid. Why would you ever do that? And after the movie, I was like, oh, that took me a minute to realize why that's bad. I've implicated myself in the fact that I was successfully seduced along with Danny in this movie to end up where she ended up. And it was only after I'd finished the movie and turned it off and walked away, like maybe a week later, where the light bulb went on. And I was like, oh, that took me a while to realize that this is actually not good and we should not be rooting for her at the end. And this is a horrible screaming trap. And some people watched that and immediately got there, but I was seduced. And so I think that is the power of the term that we're talking about today, is when it draws you out, draws you in, calls you in, and you actually don't know your own psychological movement until it's exposed to you afterwards. There's so much as designers we can do with that, and there's so much as players that we can receive from that. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how surreal of a feeling it was to be surrounded by viewers who were having that same experience in that film. And it's definitely one of the touchstones of like what led me to this. So yeah, thank you. Janaea, how about you?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. Because for me, it doesn't just go with like specific narrative medium. It can also be like spoken experience. So as like a Black femme, one of my childhood basically duties was to like be with my grandmother and to like listen to my grandmother. And like within Black families, a lot of your history is oral history, right? So as a very small child, as you can tell, I am very light skinned. That is my family, not necessarily, right? My grandmother was very dark. And as a child, my grandmother would tell me stories of her childhood. And all of the stories had like a lot of things in common. I mean, yeah, racism, big thing. But one of the things you won't catch was colorism and how much colorism affected her life, even though she wasn't really thinking about it in the same way that I was. So she would not love the gorgeousness that she saw sometimes and would reflect that on others based on these stories. So she, in one very famous story, she and my great aunt, who could pass for white, were walking down the street in Pittsburgh, and a car filled with racists basically asked why my very pale grandmother, auntie, was out with insert slur here, to which that auntie, who was all of like 4'10", and like this is like the late 40s, early 50s, okay, in a very segregated city, she went ham on them and it was like, I am too. All of this expletive deleted. And one of the things I had reflected back in me was the following: colorism in big, bold letters not only deeply harms people that you love, it is your job to be the person who steps in when this is your duty. This is what you do, right? So it's not media, but those stories that she told me always came back to me when I watched other media. So like whether it was looking at films like Moll Flanders, like books like Moll Flanders, in which I was like, hey, let's talk about sex work is real work, right? Like, and this is me as a kid. But like, in order to get there, I had to really understand that these were some things I wanted to think about, that I wanted to do in order to make myself a better human.
Absolutely. Yeah. That challenge of, and it's interesting that you lead with personal anecdotes and personal stories that called you to kind of do the same work on yourself, and how that really informed how you relate to media that you're intaking, and like what experiences and what perspectives you're taking on from other people through the things that they create. I think that in contemplating this, like, I'm coming from the other side, but really a lot of the challenge of this, at least when I've had those moments in a game or like watching a film where I felt really called out, brings me to reflect on these moments where I should be doing that work in my everyday life anyway. so I'm excited to like get into kind of that thread a little bit more.
Yeah, I call it taking it on the chin. It's like, oh, well, all right, well, I'll just take this on the chin. I'll think about this. Let's sit back here. But yeah, it's a thing.
I feel like that's actually like a perfect thread into the second question. In your own work, what is your favorite method or tool to implicate your audience in particular? Is there a particular conclusion that you want them to reach in this? What are you hoping they'll consider in their experience with this particular challenge? So, Strix, I'd like to start with you. And I see you smiling. You seem excited about this one.
Well, I mean, I don't know how to talk about this without talking about Bluebeard's Bride, right? So for those unfamiliar, Bluebeard's Bride is a horror RPG based on the fairy tale of Bluebeard, which is a violent, basically sexual trauma, but very fun to play. But the thing about Bluebeard's Bride design is we never force anyone to do anything. Like, first of all, we're very explicit about like, don't play this game if you don't think you're gonna have a good time. And then our core mechanic, Shiver from Fear, is a voluntary mechanic, meaning like we encourage and we set up players to do it voluntarily. And the reason why is you can't implicate yourself if you're not invited to do so, right? And so Shiver from Fear is just a big old invitation with red lights blinking on and off, going, here, here lies your shadow. Do you want to open the box and let it out? And the whole game is about that. So, if you're playing, hopefully there's a nominal interest there. But with Shiver from Fear, we don't tell people what they're afraid of, because it is a horror game. We ask them, what are they afraid of? And then it's the GM's job to make it worse in that moment. And so I think you have to give players, I mean, the phrase is wrong, but enough room to hang themselves, essentially. And what you want to do as part of responsible design, I think, is give them all the signals that is what they're signing up for. I've seen implication designed into especially some Nordic style LARPs where maybe it's not been on the even keel, where people don't necessarily know what they're getting into, but I think consent around this type of thing is very important.
Yeah. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
such the consent angle of this as well. It's something that I've been contemplating really deeply. And we'll get into that in a later question, but I think it's really important to kind of highlight that inviting someone into the implication is like part of the ingredients to like get people to like actually reflect on what's happening rather than having them just freeze in it. But yeah, April, how about you? What's your favorite tool to implicate your audience?
Well, I want to follow sort of like a trail of inviting someone to get implicated from sort of like the thesis of this is what the game is about. You're here to do this thing. And here are the themes that we're going to be exploring. And then when you pick up Thirsty Sword Lesbians and you look through the playbooks, people will be like, oh, too real, or why are you calling me out like this? Because the playbooks are all focused around an emotional conflict, like the trickster craves closeness but fears vulnerability and has this whole mechanic called Too Many Feelings for connecting that with the gameplay. But then you get into it, and something that I notice is that people are often looking for, where's the mechanic that lets me roll dice and bend someone to my will, right? Like, I want to roll persuade or seduce or something, and that's not there, right? I'm like, well, in this game, there are two approaches to that. One is you can try to figure them out and understand what they care about and want, like what their desires are as a person in this fictional narrative. Or you can find a way that will make them care about your opinion of them, which can be flirting if you're a particularly thirsty sword lesbian, but can be some other way, right? So all of that can be helpful for reflecting on the assumptions that we make going into an RPG and telling a story, particularly a story that's going to be about emotional relationships or deep emotional connection, and how much we are thinking about the people that are being related to as people, as opposed to sort of props or dolls. And those are sort of three different layers of inviting someone into the immersion, and sort of like, here's an obvious thing. Like, if you play this playbook, this is what you're going to be exploring. And then just some features of like, this is the kind of world and story that is embodied in the mechanics. And I think, a lot of games have all those levels or more levels of immersive implication, both. And I think that also highlights, it can be like, aha, I gotcha. You noticed something that you don't like about yourself. Or it can be like, aha, I see you. I'm going to validate and offer you some like catharsis around this experience that might help you name something that like is actually also going to help you grow, but the immersive implication is sort of like your teammate in that, as opposed to like, haha, you're bad, I gotcha, I'm a good game designer.
I love the idea of not positioning this around just game, right? Like that's really, really important when you are trying to make someone step into their agency, and realize like what their own consequence is. Like I think a lot of people really avoid that, not just in the course of games, but just day to day, like avoid making choices because there's so much shame around control, and also so much teaching of like where your control lies is actually positioned around someone else and not around yourself. So I love that you bring that up, that this can be a cathartic thing, and the tools that you've wrought in the playbooks that you've written for Thirsty Sword Lesbians, and in other games, like those kind of pointers can lead someone to that positive end. Janaea, how about you?
Well, I'll jump into this thread. This is a good kind of feel here. So I am like of the Mary Poppins school of magic, right? A spoonful of sugar helps medicine go down. Very trite. I know, but it's been my motto since like who knows when. So what do I mean by that? So I design a lot of different styles of games, everything from like I work at Carnegie Mellon, so like I also design games for children and I design games for adults, but then I design like giant LARPs, et cetera, et cetera. But in all of these, there's like something I love doing, and that is inviting you to joy so that you can jump off the cliff, right? Like, and when I say inviting you to joy, I mean like um, one of the big things that can happen in like a blockbuster LARP that's done in Nordic style is that there could be various forms of like dress and undress. And like sometimes there'll be like really beautiful themes of like erotic or like the sexy. Well, if you're in a marginalized body, especially being played in a homogeneous, like a country that's like is mostly, I'm going to put big quotations around that, right? Considers itself kind of like this homogeneous space, then they're going to bring their ideas of what's sexy, what's beautiful into that play space. So who gets left out? Well, here are the people being left out. You have people of color being fetishized. You have, if you are larger, so if you're fat, you're not attractive. If you're trans, do you want to out yourself as trans to feel sexy at a LARP? Do you how do you work around this but still have like the same liberating feeling? So my big example is I worked on a Nordic LARP with a studio named Atropos, and we did the Forbidden History, and it's like a dark academia thing. But there's like these secret societies, for those of you who don't know. One of the secret societies I decided that was just going to be for those who wanted to feel sexy, but whose body, like for who thought or like who wanted like to feel sexy, but often felt like they were left out, right? And players kind of self-selected themselves. So it was like consent to be beautiful in this space and trust me with your bodies. And like I'm really grateful for those players, because when I created this, we started off from the very idea that in this group we were going to be beautiful. We already thought we were beautiful. Our bodies change. Our bodies are different. And like it was also a part of like I'm trying not to spoil this LARP at the same time, one, because it's running again, right? So I'm like, oh. But the point of the matter was that it wasn't a safe space, but it was a space for people to feel as if they could go all in. And I was really pleased to see players trusting the people around them, and it was very small, very intimate, and actually do that. And by the end of the LARP, they were just lost, and it was wonderful. They were just having the time of their lives, crying and being hot messes and rolling around, and like there was some grapes. I don't know, I don't remember. But I will tell you that I think sometimes my favorite things to do is to like lure you in with the joy so that you can do the hard work in the middle, or trust yourself to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do because you know that the people around you can like prop you up.
Yeah.
It's like scaffolding, but with like bodies. I don't know.
No, that, I mean, like, that makes sense. Like, through all of those answers, there's this through line of kind of creating a scaffolding, as you said, of framing the consequence that you're stepping into, of framing, of scoping the consequence, I guess, because we don't exactly know if we're playing with stories and we're all bouncing off of each other and contributing to this narrative or this experience. The particulars of where we're going to take those things and take that shared space. But
Can I build on that a little?
I'm sorry.
Can I build on what Janaea said a little bit?
Absolutely, please.
I think there's a piece of this immersive implication that is getting free from constraints that you are under outside of the play experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if we have a game and a context that gives you permission to feel beautiful or explore like being queer or things that are suppressed, right, when you're outside of that context, then just being immersed in even just the social setting, but the game does some of the work of setting what that environment is going to be, and being immersed in that can then, of course, inspire you to figure things out because you finally have like a place to explore it, just like Janaea was saying.
Okay, so no, but I want to build on this.
Yeah, please.
So, okay, so does this mean alibi and immersive implication are like at loggerheads with each other? Like, what is their relationship?
Strix, you're gonna have me say something that's gonna get me kicked out of the LARP scene. So I'll say it, which is, I don't think alibi exists.
What?
Yeah, that's right. I said it. I'm gonna look right at the camera. I'll get closer. I don't think alibi exists. There.
So you're gonna have to explain yourself.
Yeah, actually, I both. Yeah, Janaea, please expound upon your response.
I say it in a tongue-in-cheek way, but sometimes, yes, I think people talk about alibi. So alibi, for folks who don't know, is sometimes like your permission to engage in these acts within like a design or within a space. And like that's been like a big standpoint, a big hallmark, especially when you're talking about like tougher games, the quote unquote type 2 kind of a games in which you're going through like really deep or difficult experiences. So when I say alibi doesn't exist, I think that you don't necessarily need one because you've already chosen to play the game. You could say like the alibi is there for your feelings or like there for you to explore something in the game. Okay, I'll agree with that. But sometimes alibi is often used as an excuse to do the thing that you are literally in the middle of doing. You didn't need the alibi. You already did it. Right? Like you signed up for sexy LARP. You know you signed up for sexy LARP. You know, like that, it's already there. It's not it's maybe an alibi for you to
well, yeah, but like isn't alibi
whatever,
like mental space to help you deal with getting close to something you're uncomfortable with? Like so alibi is really about offlining the ego, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ego gets in the way and tries to protect the person, right? Like this is threatening. I won't do this. But alibi is that interjection that gets the ego to back down or to nullify it so that you can get emotionally or psychologically closer to that material in the play space.
Mm-hmm.
And it is definitely a safety blanket, right? Like no argument here. But like, does it really not exist? Does it really not?
I think it doesn't. I think, you know what? Let's talk about it this way. There's a difference between a fine lamb's wool baby blanket and and a weighted blanket that you need. I think we often think of alibi as a weighted blanket. So like, it's the alibi, right? So you're sitting there. But I think it's more like a cheap muslin curtain flapping in the wind, right? So I will give it to you. Yes, with the space. Maybe there's a little space, but I think I can see through. It's as sheer as this weird sleeve.
Well, I don't know. I think different people need different levels of alibi based on how strong their ego is in this process. Not saying how strong their ego is as a person, but like how threatening the material is to them, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I think it varies.
Change with different material. Yeah.
Like I'm definitely of the muslin lamb's wool variety. I can take it, but I've been doing LARP for a long time. I don't feel like I need the alibi as much anymore, personally. I don't know. We're on a totally different subject now. I'm sorry, Jabari.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. This is such a fruitful descent. Like this does touch on like a parallel question that was percolating in my mind. Like we started with in digging deep with kind of an anecdote about a movie that provoked this kind of implication, which is something that like you've opted into, and your options are like watch the movie or don't watch the movie at that point. Like it's not there aren't all of these levers that we've come to expect in story gaming or in LARP, and so it's interesting to like get more directly to the heart of this.
Yeah, well, I think like implication is just the alibi is gone. It's ripped away. There is no more alibi anymore. It's just you and the implication of yourself and what you've experienced and what it says about you.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, what is the relationship here between immersive implication and alibi? Because they seem diametrically opposed to me.
I'm very glad for this.
Ooh,
this
I just love whatever April is thinking right now.
Before we move on to the third question, I would love to hear.
I am thinking about the times when I will be at a table and we will be figuring out like our safety palette. I'll be like, I'm okay with including that as long as it is portrayed as negative in the narrative, right? And I'm not totally sure how that relates to alibi and immersive implication, but it feels related. Alibi is a term that I am learning today from you, but like it certainly is. Because if you don't have that ability to do a fine-grained sort of contingent safety tool, then your options are either sort of let it exist and take your chances with whether it's going to be commented on in a critical way as part of the story that you're telling, or just no, I don't want to touch that subject matter. I don't feel that this is like a safe place to do that, or I'm not in a good state to do it, and it's just not talked about at all. And there's a really actually very big universe in between those two options, where either because of the game I've picked or because of the palette that I've set with my group, we're going to explore some hard themes, and you just need to not really be terrible about them. I want to explore how they are terrible, and I'm trusting you, but also warning you, don't be terrible about them yourself.
Yeah, all of this is kind of, and I think this whole topic also springs from like wading into a medium like this as someone who's Black and agender, right? Like spaces in general like don't really feel safe for me. And so I like whenever I'm looking at like what people do with interactive media, I'm like, okay, like this space is not safe. The space will not ever be safe. It can always be safer. And that striving to make that space safer, but also leaning into the places that it's thorny and opening up the conversation about like where we're implicitly involved in that makes me feel safe after the fact, because I know that the people that I'm involved with are concerned about the same thing. We should move on to the next question.
Oh, we can sit here forever. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Why do audiences and participants lean away from their own agency in a fictionalized context? And what do you find most effective in getting them to bridge that gap into their own choices, Janaea?
We just talked about this. We just talked about the ego and how it doesn't want you to get hurt. That's it.
Yeah. And also, And also,
Cool. So
people
yeah, you seem to have more to say.
What's that?
Sorry, you seem to have more to say specifically about this, so please do.
Oh, me, yes.
Yeah.
And also, players, they're not all players, but a lot of players have been punished for the ways that they've chosen to exercise their agency in the real world. And so when you are in a game, it really helps those players for the game to explicitly tell you, you have this agency, you have permission to do it, right? Like, I can pick up a game, and if it says, choose one of these aesthetics, you'd be like, who the hell are you to tell me what aesthetics I can choose? I'm writing down another one. But another player will pick that up and be like, oh no, I wanted something else, but it says I have to choose one of these. I feel like, great, choose one or make up your own. You did it.
Yeah.
But it comes from being in a situation that's parallel to a real world situation where you either don't have that agency or are punished for exercising it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, go ahead, Jabari.
I was just gonna say, I can't tell you how many times I've run a game with someone who's new to story games or role-playing games, where like something disastrous will happen as a result of the choices that they've made in the fiction, and they will be apologizing to the rest of the table, and meanwhile I'm sitting there and everyone else is looking at each other like, no, you like caused like the best chunk of the session. Like, why are you apologizing 2 hours later? Like, we loved that. We love that you did that. And like, it wasn't good maybe for what happened to the proxies that everyone has stepped into in that fiction, but it was great for everyone who was outside of that space.
So I want to jump in and tell you what my number one nemesis is. Cultural specificity. Cultural specificity will kick you in the butt. You don't even know. And when I say that, I mean, one of the biggest things I tend to run into is when you have, especially if you're playing with a large amount of people from a large amount of cultures, backgrounds, and especially marginalizations, you do not know. If you don't know a large variety of cultures and how people can exist, if you've never been raised around large amounts of varying different religions, et cetera, it doesn't mean you're bad, right? It just means you may not be aware of like how stories work or how people think of themselves, right? And that can sometimes block you. So for instance, there was a really great LARP called The Quota. The Quota was an international refugee LARP. It was a LARP about like a future crisis after Brexit, in which people were trying to go over the border into Wales. It was really powerful. It was shot. It was like shot. It was done in it was played in a disused prison in the middle of nowhere in England. While I was playing this game in this body, so I am in this body, okay, this like black femme queer body signaling all of that, I had a player come up to me 5 inches, and I'm playing a character who was like a very flimsy version of myself on purpose. And as I'm playing this character, someone comes up to me and was like, you will never know what it's like to be oppressed. And I was just like, what? And like, I was like really shocked. But this person was like really driving for this hard Nordic losing energy, right? Because like they come from a culture in which saying something like that and then like getting deep into like a drama and like a dark place where everyone must lose. No one must get to Wales, right? And you can't go to Wales either. Like there can be no happiness. It was really shocking to me as someone who was playing in this body, being told I could not be oppressed while playing a person who was also sharing that body. So it was a really weird situation. But because I come from a culture in which you're allowed to win, and winning winning is subjective, right? You're allowed to end happily with big air quotes. I didn't see any problem with me being able to finally beat the state, right? Like I couldn't, Jonea can't beat the state, right? But that person could in this time. So when I wanted to take the step, a person who says you can never win an alert says no, right? So there's like, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that person's bad or they're like a bad player. It just means that sometimes that tension doesn't always happen,
Mhm.
right? If they have different story views. That was long. Hopefully it was elusive.
I think it's useful. I think it also speaks to like those gaps in knowledge, like those different places like don't have to be stagnant points in the experience that everyone's sharing. Um, Last question, because I would like to give some time for maybe a question or two from the audience. Um, so really quickly, is there a place where implicating players or audiences distances them from the context they are meant to be immersed in? Can this de-immersion also be valuable, and what does that look like if so? I feel like we've kind of talked around this and stepped on this question a little bit, but I'd like to specifically hear Strix from you first on this.
Yeah, I think this can happen when a text bites too hard. Um,
Mm.
and that's not necessarily a text's fault. Some people can't bear to be bitten that hard, and sometimes it's actually just a lot. I think a lot about Lolita on this subject. That is a text that bites, right? And it's a text that implicates.
Mhm.
And you see a high amount of rejection of Lolita as a piece of art because the immersive implication bit too hard and it was jettisoned out the side window for them to never deal with again. So that's it. That's immediately where my brain goes.
Mm.
Cool. April.
Yeah. When you're exploring deeply emotional topics in an RPG, you don't always know where it's going to take you, and you can discover in the moment, this is too intense. I need an escape valve for this. And having access to that escape valve means that you can be more confident going into that situation. So when you have an RPG where you can just role play things out, but you can also say like, I'm going to reach for the dice now. I think now I am rolling a mechanic and sort of take that step back. That lets you get a little bit more immersed and invested, and that's something that is really important to me in my game design for sure. Like when we first started talking about this panel, I'm like, I've designed a lot of ways to get out of being immersed, like because I want to have a lifeline when I'm down there, when I'm
Yeah.
immersed.
It's absolutely important. Janaea.
I think I'm with April on this one. You can design that. You can design. I love breaking case of help me. Um, One of the best LARPs I think actually does this is Just Little Loving. It's a LARP about the AIDS crisis
Mm.
in New York City. It is a very long LARP. It's like 5 days. Okay, that's incredibly long for a LARP, but it's 5 days because there's a whole day of debrief and like contextualization and just relaxing and just not being in the LARP and just like seeing people as people. And then every single act, people had a very long time, almost half a day, to come back to themselves, be back in the bodies that, this is who I actually am.
Mhm.
I'm not my character. And like see people as people. And that LARP would not nearly be as successful if it didn't say, hey, I need to have 20 minutes. I need to have a half a day to connect myself in my life. So I think that there's a really great way that you can just plan for pauses and it actually will not hurt like immersion in the future. Like there's a way to do it.
Thank you. Uh, let's see. I think that we have time for one question from the audience. So, okay. So
I know, these are great questions.
I know, they're all good.
How dare you?
I'm gonna go with the second question here. What does it mean for a collaborative medium to give value to immersion in someone's individual experience? So, April, please, if you'd like to answer this very quickly,
Can you repeat
I think 30 seconds.
Can you repeat
What does it
the other
mean for?
question?
Yeah, what does it mean for a collaborative medium to give value to immersion in someone's individual experience?
Don't call on me first. I'm thinking.
Cool. Strix?
I would need to ask a question about the question in order to answer it.
Sure.
It doesn't have enough context for me, honestly. So, are we saying prioritizing individual experiences of immersion? Are we saying balancing? I don't really know where to attack this. So
I think prioritizing and filtering the collaborative experience through individual perspectives is the way that I'm going to interpret it.
Okay. Well, Americans are poisoned to think about everything in individualistic terms. I think that in collaborative mediums, collaboration takes precedence. The end.
Agree.
And I think a collaborative medium is a great way of engaging with the different perspectives that people bring. Particularly, there are ways of playing where you're totally embodied and there's no like out of character talk, and there are ways of playing that have more like reflection of like what's going on has like impacted me this way, and we're sort of like having that commentary as we go along. And I don't know that that's immersive implication, but it can lead to it.
Ooh, I actually do think that it is just that act of like disrupting someone's pattern to prioritize their own, like propping up their own experiences rather than like taking in and responding to others, is something that I, as an American, have had to be called out on and have called many other Americans out on at a table. So, yeah. Janaea?
We could say copy paste tricks. I really agree. I think there's ways to do individual feelings that you can design that within a space. Whereas like writing letters between people, or like I think Good Society does that really well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can do a little bit of the individual, but even that individual serves the collaborative. So I always like to bring, since it's a collaborative medium, even though you may individually be there, everyone's going on the ride. Everyone's on the ride. Let's think about everybody in it, in a way.
To that end, we are just about out of time, but you don't have to stop discussing the wealth of things that all three of you, thank you very much for joining me in this, have brought to this discussion. If you want to continue talking about this topic and others, you can join the Big Bad Con Discord and continue the discussion there about this and everything else. Before we wrap up, Janaea, where can we find you online?
You can find me at Violet Riot Games. I'm sorry. You can find. Yes, sometimes I don't want to be perceived. You can find me at Violet Riot Games or at joneakemper.com.
April, where can we find you?
April Walsh, Gay Spaceship Games, gayspaceship.com, and at Gay Spaceship GMS on Twitter, because that's how many characters you can have.
And Strix, where can we find you?
Twitter is my gateway. You can find everything else about me there. I am _Strix, STIAX.
Wonderful. And you can find me at Goblin Princet on Twitter, also goblinprincet.com if you want to see some of my work. Thank you all for joining, and thanks for talking about this, all three of you. This is an amazing discussion, and I want to talk about it more, but we must go.
Thank you for joining, everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.